Hey guys, tonight we wake not in a climate-controlled room with a glowing alarm clock on the nightstand, but in a smoke-hazed Viking longhouse where time doesn't tick, it drips, smolders, and creaks. You're wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, curled on a straw-stuffed mattress beside your cousin, who still smells faintly of smoked herring. There are no clocks here, no bells, no neat rows of digital digits to tell you it's 6:42 a.m. There's only the light filtering in through the slatted roof, and the faint plink of thawed frost dripping from the beams. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is by your clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint up at the thatch above. Morning light slants in differently now than it did a few weeks ago. It's more golden, and it hits the long central beam of the house at a sharper angle. That's how you know it's early spring, or nearly so. The roof tells you. For most people today, time is sliced into uniform, hours, and minutes. But for you, a Viking farmer in 9th century Scandinavia, time breathes. It stretches and shrinks depending on the season, the chores, and whether the sun can be bothered to show up. And in this longhouse, the rising of the sun doesn't mean get up at 6 a.m. sharp. It means get up when the light hits the cookpot and the chickens start judging you. There's no rooster crowing yet, just the soft wheeze of your brother's sleep and the occasional drip of water from a thawing beam. That slow drip, that's the roof telling you the frost is loosening. It's a sign you've survived another brutal Viking winter, and that the gods might, just maybe, be in a generous mood. Historians still argue whether early medieval Scandinavians tracked time consciously or just adapted intuitively to environmental cues. But in your world, time is an intimate companion, not a master. You know it by smell, by weight, by the rhythm of the chores your family has done for generations. Like when the bread ovens are fired up. Now that's a signal. The house smells like warm barley, and your stomach starts its own kind of countdown. You don't need a clock to know breakfast is near. You just need to count the plumes of smoke rising through the smoke hole, or track how long it takes your grandmother to hum through her bread-making tune, off-key and oddly threatening. As always, another clue? The behavior of the animals. You learn to read your goats the way some folks read sundials. If they're stamping their hooves and bleating in unison, it's past milking time. If they're quiet, you still got time to nap. Probably. You rise, eventually, stretching beneath the dim light filtering in from the door slit. No one's invented curtains, and privacy is a modern luxury, so the sun's path across the slatted roof beams is everyone's alarm clock. It shifts slowly over the months, tracing your family's life from winter huddles to summer exoduses. You pad across the packed dirt floor. The dust is damp from last night's coals, and you step carefully to avoid the sharp bone your uncle insists is decorative. At the back of the longhouse, the hearth glows faintly, embers kept alive through the night. Your mother adds more peat and exhales gently, as if coaxing the day awake. Almost firewood season, she mutters, more to herself than to you. You nod. She doesn't mean firewood for winter. That was months ago. She means firewood for drying fish. You're nearly in the season of curing and salting, and that means spring is just ahead. Her sense of time is flawless. She could probably tell you the date just by sniffing the air and looking at the icicles outside the door. You join the others for a breakfast that marks more than a meal. It marks a point in the day, a checkpoint in the rhythm of survival, and without realizing it, you're already marking time by habit, by hunger, and by the soft groan of wood in the walls. Here in the longhouse, shadows grow longer and shorter with the days. That's one of the most reliable cues you have. The interplay of light and dark. You've noticed that the sun now rises just a bit further north than it did last month. It casts shadows through the open eaves in a slightly different pattern. That tells you the year is inching forward. Of course, there are miscalculations. Sometimes you mistake a false thaw for early spring and dig your onions too soon. Other times, you oversleep and miss the best hunting hours. But time here isn't rigid. It forgives. It doesn't punish you with beeping alarms or late penalties. It just moves on, slowly, like fog rolling over a fjord. A quirky tidbit? Some families, especially in Iceland, used to hang carved sticks or bones from the rafters to measure time in a specific way, how long it took melted frost to drip down the stick and hit a marked notch. It was more art than science. A drip clock, if you will. Not terribly accurate. But then again, neither is your cousin Eric's storytelling. Speaking of Eric, he stumbles out of his sleeping space now, yawning dramatically and declaring that it must be nearly fish stew o'clock. He means mid-morning. You roll your eyes. He always says that, and he's always wrong. Still, he's not far off. So much of your life is tied to nature's rhythms. Light and dark, wet and dry, warm and cold. In this world, time isn't a measurement. It's a feeling. It's in the creak of the beams, the hiss of the hearth, the ache in your joints when the wind shifts. You don't count it so much as live inside it. Tomorrow, the shadow on the wall might shift a little earlier. The frost may not drip quite as much, and the goats might demand milking just a hair sooner. That's time's quiet way of whispering, you're moving forward, even if you're barefoot and half asleep in a smoky longhouse. You're outside now, standing in a landscape that looks like a painting someone left out in the rain. Gray skies, wet turf, and clouds that threaten to sulk forever. No sun, no shadows, and certainly no convenient phone app to tell you it's 10:47 in the morning. But you squint up anyway. Somewhere behind all that gray hangs the sun. You can feel its presence. Not by warmth. No. Not this far north in early spring. But by how the clouds seem just a bit thinner toward the east. It's time to find your sunstone. You shuffle over to the storage nook by the pigsty, brush aside a smelly rag. You try not to think about what it's been used for, and pull out a pale, glassy crystal the size of a chicken egg. Not fancy, just calcite, a mineral your uncle once brought home from a distant trip. It looks unimpressive, feels cool and smooth in your hand, but if you tilt it just right, there. The cloudy sky lights up in the stone. A spot glows faintly, like a hidden star inside the rock. That glowing point tells you where the sun is hiding. It's called birefringence, though of course you wouldn't call it that. You just know it works. You rotate the stone slowly until the two light patterns in the crystal line up, and now you're pointing almost directly at the invisible sun. Historians still argue whether sunstones were truly used for navigation, or whether they're the Viking equivalent of "my cousin swears by this," but in your hands, it feels like magic. And it gets you oriented. This is how you mark time on days when the sky forgets to cooperate. When you're out at sea, this little piece of rock might mean the difference between arriving in Hedeby with a boat full of trade goods, or washing up confused and empty-handed on a Scottish beach 3 days late. But even on land, you use the sunstone not just for direction, but to feel the hour. You know the sun's position tells you whether it's close to midday or if it's time to turn back from the forest before you lose the light. Time here isn't measured in numbers, it's measured in usefulness. You don't say it's 3 p.m., you say it's about 2 hours before the wolves come out. Some of your neighbors have other tricks. Old Hertha down by the river claims she can taste the weather on the wind and sense the hour by how her bones creak. You're not sure if that's true, but when she tells you to hurry the harvest or pack up your nets, you listen, and usually, she's right. Timekeeping here is a communal affair. It's not your responsibility alone to track the sun. Your whole household notices these things. They whisper, share, guess. The position of the sun relative to the mountain ridge, the shadow of the tree on the thatch roof, the way the moss dries just a little earlier now than it did last week, and that sunstone. It's a shared tool, passed from hand to hand. A talisman of confidence, a weirdly precious rock that's seen more of the North Sea than you ever will. On voyages, it's even more important. You think of your uncle's stories, how he and his shipmates used the sunstone to confirm their course during an overcast week of nothing but cold mist and arguments. How it guided them westward when every bone in their body said to turn back. One quirky tidbit: some Icelandic sagas mention Solarstein and its magical properties. But scholars debate whether that refers to the same optical calcite we know, or just poetic license. After all, Vikings weren't above exaggerating. You once heard a skald claim a woman told time by watching fish leap from a fjord at fixed hours. Even by Viking standards, that seems slippery. But this crystal in your hand? It's real. You tilt it again, and sure enough, the faint glow confirms your guess. The sun is low in the southeast. You've still got time to help with the firewood before the light fades behind the ridge. You stuff the sunstone into a pouch tied to your belt, snug beside a few dried berries and a piece of hardened cheese. A typical Viking utility kit, not elegant, but effective. You look around your father is already chopping kindling, judging how many armfuls he can get done before the light changes. Your mother has laid out a skin to dry on the fence, its shadows sharp enough that she knows it's still early enough for good sun, even if she doesn't say it out loud. This shared language of light and motion, the unspoken sense of time, is part of your family's rhythm. No one wears a sundial on their wrist, but everyone moves as if guided by some deep, internal clock set by the earth itself. Sometimes, you wonder what it would be like to live in a world where someone rings a bell to signal the hour, or where you carry a little device that buzzes and lights up when it's time to eat, sleep, pray, or panic. But here, you trust the sun, the clouds, and the occasional magic rock. You grab an axe, test its weight, and join your father near the tree line. You work until your arms ache, and the light shifts just slightly, so subtly most wouldn't notice. But you do. You always do. Time has passed, not loudly, not by ticking, but by changing the light on your hands, the chill in the wind, and the way the birds have gone quiet. That's Viking time for you, not shouted, just there. You're back inside the longhouse now, warming your hands by the hearth, which hisses softly as damp logs begin to catch. It's not exactly cozy, but after an hour of hauling kindling and swearing internally at stubborn wood knots, it feels like a reward. You don't need anyone to tell you how much time has passed. You feel it in your shoulders, in the smoke-scented sweat on your back, and in the grumble of your stomach. Because here's the thing, in the Viking world, time isn't measured by devices. It's measured by doing. You know it's midday because the sheep have been moved, the wood's been chopped, and your mother is muttering about the stew being late, though no one agrees what late means without a sundial. You glance around and spot your little brother trying to herd chickens into the wrong corner of the pen. Again, that tells you it's still early enough in the day for him to have energy, which is its own kind of clock. And that goat, the one chewing on the laundry line, definitely before evening, or she'd already be curled up in the hay pile, digesting her sins. In the absence of mechanical clocks, you and your kin rely on the rhythm of repeated actions: sheep time, bread time, hay time. Your daily activities aren't assigned a number, they are the number. For instance, you know that it takes about 3 loaves of flatbread baked on the hearthstone to get from sunup to sun high. Your mother swears she can tell the time by how far along the second loaf is when the smoke changes color. And oddly, she's almost always right. There's a kind of poetry in this. The world itself becomes your timekeeper. You don't so much watch the clock as feel the pattern, the repetition of tasks, the order of chores. It all creates a cadence that your body learns by heart. You milk the goats? That's 1 unit. Walk them to the pasture and back? 2 more. Pull fish from the drying racks and gut them? That's half a day. Right there. The hands on your imaginary clock aren't ticking. They're stirring, hammering, carrying, shouting. Historians still argue whether this activity-based sense of time made Vikings less accurate or just less anxious. Some believe it allowed for greater flexibility, letting the day expand or contract with the seasons. Others think it caused a lot of "I'll be there soon" situations that dragged into "never showed up." But there is a system, even if it doesn't look like one. Take the kitchen chores. You've noticed that, once the stew has been stirred a certain number of times, someone always goes out to check the nets. Not because they were told, but because that's just when it happens. Your household hums with invisible timers triggered by movement, noise, even smells. Want a quirky detail? Some sagas tell of warriors who use the number of heartbeats between certain actions to measure time in battle. One tale insists a hero counted 50 beats between each axe swing and used it to predict his opponent's rhythm. Sounds unlikely, unless he had the cardio of a horse. In your own home, timekeeping is a full-body experience. You can tell it's almost supper when your knees creak a certain way, walking back from the stream, or when the smoke in the longhouse shifts from sharp pine to mellow peat. The world is filled with small signals, if you know where to sniff. Even your grandmother, who barely moves these days, has her own clock. She claps exactly once when she wants something. Not a word, not a glance, just a clap. And depending on the time of day, you already know what she wants. Clap before noon, water, clap in the afternoon, her wooden comb, clap at night. She's cold, and you'd better get the good wool. You sit beside her now, sharing a strip of dried fish and watching the fire reflect in her eyes. She smiles faintly. 3 stew stirs past sun high, she mumbles, licking salt from her fingers. Good time to mend boots. You nod. Not because you agree, but because you admire the confidence. Your sister, meanwhile, is already at it, pulling old leather soles from a hanging bag and setting out a bent bone needle. She doesn't ask what time it is. She knows. Everyone knows. Time is embedded in muscle memory. And then there's sleep, a tricky business. Sleep, without clocks. You have to rely on body signals and darkness. Some nights, you sleep in 2 shifts, common in the Viking world. First sleep until midnight-ish. Then you rise, poke at the fire, whisper stories, maybe eat something. Then go back to sleep. It's oddly peaceful. That waking interlude in the middle of the night feels secret and safe. You sit by the embers, wrap a fur around your shoulders, and feel the hush settle into your bones. Even time itself seems to pause. Just you, the stars, when they show up, and the occasional grunt from someone having a dream about geese again. Eventually, the world turns. It always does. Light comes back. Fire needs tending. Chores return. And once again, your inner clock resets. Not because it beeped, because it lived alongside you. You may not know it's 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, but you know this. You've done enough today to feel the time pass. And that's what counts. You wake, not to a jarring alarm or flashing screen, but to the absence of dark. The light pouring in through the slats in the longhouse roof isn't golden and soft. It's bright, blunt, and relentless. You groan, blinking as the day announces itself far too early for your taste. Summer is here, and with it, time has stretched thin and strange. There's no waking up, because night barely happened. In winter, the sun crawls up grudgingly around mid-morning and vanishes in the blink of an eye. But now, it barely sets. You remember lying down last night when the sky was peach-colored, and now, somehow, it's still peach-colored, or maybe salmon. Honestly, the sun just does what it wants in the far north. This is the time of year when you start to lose track of sleep, meals, and arguments. When the sun stays up for 20 hours a day, or never quite dips below the horizon, your body forgets how to feel tired, or hungry, or polite. Time in the Viking world, especially above the Arctic Circle, is elastic. In summer, the days melt together. In winter, they break apart and drift like ice flows. You could live 2 entirely different lives depending on the month, even if you never leave your village. This morning, you step outside to feed the goats and have to squint against the glare. It's technically morning, but your neighbor is already splitting fish, and someone is singing a wedding song down the hill. Could be 5 a.m., could be 10, could be yesterday. Really. Historians still argue whether Viking-age people used rigid sleeping schedules or adapted fluidly to the wild seasonal light changes. Evidence from sagas and seasonal poetry suggests they often followed a looser rhythm, especially in summer, when productivity could stretch far into the nightless twilight. You walk the familiar path to the field, your feet brushing dew off the grass that never had time to dry. The air smells sharp and clean, too early for the warmth of manure or the smokiness of breakfast fires, but already, you hear tools clinking and animals shuffling. Everyone is awake, or at least pretending to be. You pass your uncle hauling a basket of greens, muttering something about days half gone, even though it can't be more than mid-morning. He's not wrong, though. When the sun barely sets, every hour feels like a dare. And yet, you all manage. You adapt. Instead of fixed hours, you organize time around events. Today, you know it's early because the bread hasn't been shaped yet. The cows haven't wandered toward the stream, and no one's complained about their back. Give it 3 more stew stirs, You remember last winter, when time had the opposite problem? The sun rose for just a handful of hours, then ducked back under the horizon like it owed you money. You'd wake, stumble through endless dusk, and be asleep again before your body understood the day had even started. Your father had a saying, winter is for waiting, summer is for working. That's why these long summer days, bordering on timeless, are so precious. You have to make them count, even if you lose track of meals and sleep in the process. A quirky tidbit? Some Viking farmers supposedly trained their bodies to nap lightly several times a day during summer, fitting in rest between chores like squirrels storing sunlight. Others relied on social cues. When the neighbor started snoring, it was probably time to lie down too. You pass the village stream, its surface catching the endless twilight. Your reflection looks confused, sleep deprived, possibly cursed. You splash some water on your face and continue on to the upper fields, where you'll be hauling peat until your arms give out or the sky decides to dim, whichever comes first. There's no horn, no bell, no shadow to follow, just your own internal sense that this is the moment to begin, and that's both freeing and maddening. You've definitely eaten lunch at dawn and gone to sleep at what was technically noon, but your goats didn't seem to mind. Later that afternoon, if you can call it that, you'll head back. Bleary-eyed and sweat-soaked, the longhouse will be humming with mismatched conversations. Someone's carving a comb. Another is scolding a toddler who tried to chew on a flint knife. And two cousins are arguing whether it's Thursday or fish day. Your mother will serve you hot broth, even though she made stew just before dawn. You'll eat it anyway, because your stomach, unlike the sun, knows what time it wants it to be. You'll sit by the fire, still burning, because no one knows when to let it die, and someone will suggest a song. A skald might start reciting a tale so old it predates your grandmother's knees. And as the sky glows stubbornly outside, refusing to sleep, you'll close your eyes and doze in place, your dreams tangled with the rhythm of days that don't end. This is Viking summertime, chaotic, luminous, and vaguely unsettling, but you learn to love it, because when winter returns, the dark will swallow the village whole, and you'll long for these golden hours that stretch like honey across your life. You wake again, this time to something more familiar. A full moon, bright and swollen, presses its pale light through the open slats of the longhouse roof. It's cold, not bitter winter cold, but that sharp, clean autumn chill that sneaks in before the fires are lit. Around you, most of your family sleeps in a huddled heap of limbs, wool, and grumbled dreams. But you stir, quietly, drawn by the moonlight and a strange, subtle tension in the air. It's the new moon, or rather, the wrong moon. You're not sure yet. Vikings didn't have calendars in the modern sense. They had moons, and not just one per month. Mind you, depending on the region, your ancestors named each moon for what it brought or what it demanded. There's the goose moon, the hay moon, the slaughter moon. The one now, judging by the grain harvest nearly done and the pigs starting to fatten, it's probably the fatting moon, or as your brother calls it, let's eat everything before winter eats us moon. You throw on a cloak and step outside. The night is crisp and still, the moon hanging low and wide like a polished shield. You stare at it, not just in wonder, but to measure something. The moon's shape, its tilt, its time of rise, all of it forms part of an ancient timekeeping system embedded in your brain like the pattern of your favorite song. People in your village have tracked the phases of the moon since long before you were born. Your grandfather used to say the waxing crescent meant it was time to salt the fish, and that if you harvested barley during a full moon, it would taste sweeter. He also said the moon could make cows give birth early if you stared at it too long, but no one ever verified that one. You crouch beside the fire pit and run your fingers through the ash. Cold. No one has stirred yet. The moon, then, must be at its peak, maybe an hour before false dawn. That tells you more than a clock ever could. Lunar phases were essential to the Viking way of life. The Norse word manader, month, is related to the word for moon, and early Viking calendars were often simply lists of full moons with names attached. Historians still debate whether these names were standardized across regions or deeply local. What's clear is this: people like you lived by the sky. Even religious festivals followed the moon. Blots, the old sacrifices, were often held during specific lunar phases. Your neighbor insists the gods only listen on a waxing moon. While your aunt claims Odin prefers a good sacrifice on the wane, you suspect the gods just like the drama of it all. Somewhere near the forest edge, a dog howls. You shiver, not from fear, but recognition. That's the moon howling hour, not officially, of course, but it happens every month. Right after the moon reaches its highest point, the village dogs start singing. You've stopped wondering why. It's just another mark on the invisible time chart your whole community follows. One quirky tradition: some families carve moon phases into wood panels or bones, not to track time strictly, but to feel it. You've seen your cousin's moonstick, an old antler etched with crescents and dots. He swears it helps him know when to start fermenting mead. Last year, he misread it and created something that nearly dissolved a ladle. You walk to the edge of the pasture, letting the moonlight paint your path. You don't need a torch. Everything is bathed in that pale, uncanny silver that makes familiar things look stranger. Your own shadow moves in ways it shouldn't, stretching sideways instead of behind. Another clue: the moon's arc is lower tonight. That means it's closer to winter. Another quiet message from the heavens. You pause by a fence post and scratch a small mark in the wood, a crude half circle, tonight's phase. Not because you need to, but because it's your habit, your own private lunar calendar. It'll help you count the days until the slaughter. Not your favorite time, but necessary. Winter doesn't care how you feel, and you're not alone in this lunar awareness. The women of your household, especially, have their own ways of tracking moons. Your sister marks her time by the herbs she picks, some gathered only under specific lunar conditions. Your mother times her dye batches by moonlight, swearing that wool turns richer blue if soaked under a waxing gibbous. You once tried to challenge her on this. Never again. Historians still argue whether Norse societies had a consistent 12-moon year, or sometimes added a 13th to match the solar cycle. The Icelandic calendar later formalized this with names like Harpa and Goa. But in your day, it's all much more intuitive. You live by the sky, not the scroll. You take one last look up at the moon. It's shifted a finger width toward the west, nudging the edge of a birch tree. Time has passed. You feel it, not in minutes, but in inches of moonlight. You head back inside, treading softly. Someone stirs near the hearth. Maybe your grandmother, maybe a ghost. Hard to tell in this light. You slide back into your blanket and feel the day slowly returning. Even if the sun is still just a promise, In this world, the moon is more than a light in the sky. It's a calendar, a ritual, a reason to get out of bed, or stay in it. It's how you know what season you're in, what chore comes next, and how much longer you have before the snow starts whispering against the door again. The sun is finally up, crawling across the horizon like a tired ox, and you're hunched over a wooden trough, elbows deep in barley mash. Your hands are cold, your back aches, and you've already been at it for what feels like hours, but no one has told you the time. Because here, the seasons themselves are the calendar. It's slaughter time. You know this not because someone announced it, but because everything in the village smells faintly of blood, salt, and anticipation. The air is sharp. The mornings are darker. The geese have stopped honking quite so cheerfully. That means it's the right season to begin trimming down the livestock. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Winter's coming and hay doesn't grow on birch trees. In the Viking world, months weren't divided by numbers. They were marked by work, by what had to be done, what nature allowed or demanded you to do. So instead of saying it's November, you'd say it's slaughter time, or wood gathering time, or frost dying season. You knew where you were in the year based on the labor your hands had learned. You've been trained since childhood to listen to these cues. The frost that lingers past sunrise, the fish that vanish upriver, the way the cows shift their weight more anxiously. You don't need a calendar to tell you what needs doing. Your bones and surroundings already whisper it to you. Historians still argue whether the Norse had a formalized 12-month calendar system during the Viking Age, or whether they primarily relied on activity-based periods tied to farming cycles. Some say the formal names came later, under Christian or Icelandic influence. Others point to early poetic references, riddled with agricultural metaphors, that suggest at least some loose structure. But for you, living in a sod-roofed farmhouse, clinging to the side of a fjord, the year is a circle of chores. You could almost draw it in the air, like a wheel of obligations. Hay cutting time, sheep shearing time, bog iron smelting time, which no one likes, fishing season, salting season, ale brewing season, and, of course, slaughter time. You glance over at your cousin, who's elbow deep in sheep entrails and humming a cheerful tune that does not match the mood. She clearly woke up ready for the job. You, less so, but there's no avoiding it. Every family participates. The animals are culled, the meat is preserved, and the bones are sometimes carved into tools, or, in the case of your artistically inclined aunt, wind chimes, slightly macabre wind chimes. You remember last summer's berry-picking season, how the air was filled with buzzing bees, aching backs, and children with stained fingers. That was a good season. Time passed then in baskets. You picked enough to dye cloth, preserve jam, and trade with the traveling merchant who smelled suspiciously of bear fat. Each season leaves a flavor in your memory, and your brain becomes the year's true record keeper. One quirky tidbit? In some regions, particularly in what is now Sweden, people would use the annual return of migratory birds as time markers. When the cranes returned, it meant plowing season. When they left, it was time to insulate the sleeping platform with extra moss. You've tried bird watching, but after mistaking a buzzard for a duck twice, you now defer to your grandmother's ears instead. There are no official names for months here, at least not that everyone agrees on, but your household does have names for times of year. The lumpy mud week marks the start of spring thaw. The smoke moon is when all the meat hangs from the rafters and the whole house smells like bacon and ghosts. Wool madness hits when you've spun too many yards of yarn and start hallucinating angry sheep in the walls. These unofficial inherited labels give your year texture, personality. You don't live in a sterile rotation of months. You live in stories. Right now, as you slice up another strip of fat and lay it on the drying rack, you're living in a story called Let's Hope the Larder is Full Enough. It's told through salted fish, hard bread, and a shared hope that the coming cold doesn't arrive early or stay too long. You step outside, wiping your hands on a stiff apron, and look out over the frost-tipped fields. The grass crunches underfoot, and a raven circles, lazily, overhead. Time isn't ticking. It's settling, like snowflakes collecting on your shoulder. You glance toward the mountain ridge. The sun barely lifts above it now, crawling along like it's too tired to climb. That confirms it. Deep autumn. No one had to tell you. You feel it in the light, in the low ceiling of gray clouds, in how fast your fingers numb. Back inside, your mother stirs a pot of stew thick enough to slow a falling knife. She doesn't check a clock. She knows it's nearly boil-over hour. You catch a glance at the meat hanging from the rafters, rows of drying fish, sausage coils, and cuts of mutton in various degrees of dehydration. It's like an edible calendar, each piece telling a different part of the year. Your little brother comes in, dragging a basket of root vegetables, muttering about tuber time, which is not an official designation, but it might as well be. He dumps them by the hearth and flops down dramatically, claiming his legs are frozen. Your grandmother tells him to chop onions until he forgets. That's how the Viking year works. A loop, built of tasks. You're not just passing time. You are time. Each action adds a notch to the year's turning wheel. And when you get it right, when everything is salted and spun and stored away, there's a deep satisfaction, like checking off a to-do list made by the land itself. You're crouched beside the hearth again, but this time you're not stirring stew or warming your hands. You're holding a thin piece of bone in one hand and a worn knife in the other, slowly scraping notches into the surface, one scratch per day. Or maybe it's one per event. You haven't quite decided yet. This is your tally bone, and it's how you're learning to track time when the sun, moon, and chores aren't quite enough. You don't really need it, but there's something deeply satisfying about making a mark, seeing the passage of time accumulate like a stack of firewood. Plus, it gives your hands something to do while your brother butchers all the names in the family saga again. Tally bones, or rune bones, are common across the villages, you know. Not everyone uses them, but enough do that you've started picking it up by imitation. The idea is simple. 1 line per day, 1 cut per chore, or 1 mark for each time your uncle gets lost coming back from the privy after dark. Some use sticks, others use bits of wood, horn, even stone. The medium doesn't matter, the meaning does. Historians still argue about the exact purpose of these tally bones. Were they proto-calendars, counting devices, memory aids for the illiterate, or were they just early Viking to-do lists? A reminder that, yes, I did fetch water during the thunderstorm. Thank you very much. You run your finger along the ridges. Each mark has a memory. That deep slash from last week? The day you helped with the iron smelting, and your eyebrows almost caught fire. The trio of short lines in a row? The berry-picking days, when your hands turned purple and your sister accused you of eating more than you brought back. You're not alone in this practice. Your aunt keeps a bundle of notched willow twigs tied with a leather cord. She claims each one marks a phase in the dying cycle for her wool. She waves them dramatically at anyone who tries to move them. Once, even at the dog. Your cousin uses carved shells instead, one for each moon. He hangs them above his bed in a neat line that rattles softly when he snores. You're pretty sure he doesn't remember what they mean anymore, but that's beside the point. Timekeeping in your world is personal, physical, and tangible. You don't just observe time, you touch it, scratch it, shape it into patterns that only make sense to you and your household. One quirky tidbit: there are stories of Viking seers carving notches into bones while reciting prophecies, each groove a symbol of a day yet to come. One saga even claims a woman predicted a shipwreck by counting how many scratches the raven made on her tally stick. Was that real or just poetic flair? Hard to say, but it makes your little bone notches feel a bit more mysterious. You place your tally bone on the edge of the hearth, beside the others. There's a comfort in seeing them stacked, like sediment in the layers of a riverbank. Time becomes visible, physical. Yours, outside, it's raining. The kind of soft, slanted rain that seems designed to get into your sleeves no matter how tightly you tie them. You watch droplets snake down the roof and think, that's 3 rain days in a row, notches on the bone, a pattern forming. Rain days mean different work. You'll be inside, mending, weaving, maybe grinding grain. The rhythm changes, the shape of your time shifting along with the weather. Your grandmother says, that's the secret to staying sane in the north. Don't fight the change, dance with it. You sit with your sister near the loom. She weaves, you count, not seconds or minutes, but how many threads before she changes color, how many patterns before the fire needs more peat, how many passes of the shuttle before the smell of burning tells you someone dropped bread into the hearth again. Historians still debate whether these notched systems were a standardized form of timekeeping or more mnemonic, a way to remember stories, promises, debts. Archaeological finds like the primstav in Norway, a wooden calendar stick with carved symbols for each day, suggest that by the late Viking Age, people had developed increasingly intricate ways to mark time. You wonder if you'll ever make something like that, a stick with a symbol for every important day: the first frost, the last berry, the return of the trader who owes your father 2 goats. For now, though, your little tally bone is enough. It's humble, honest, and full of scratches that make no sense to anyone but you. Later, when the rain eases, you'll step outside and see the sun trying to claw its way through the clouds. You'll check the shadow on the side of the longhouse. Compare it to where it landed yesterday, and nod. Time has passed again. It always does. But you don't need a bell, or a gong, or even a sundial to know it. You have your chores, your bones, your gut. You have the rhythm of raindrops and the gentle, growing ache in your shoulders. You have the memory of yesterday and the scratches you've made to prove it existed. You're not keeping time. You're living it. You smell it before you see it. Warm bread, spiced ale, and the faint but unmistakable hint of too many bodies packed into too little space. You follow the scent through the village square, past the carts and ale casks, until you reach the center of all this controlled chaos. The thing. Not a vague thing, but the thing. spelled with a capital T and a fair amount of shouting. It's Thing Week, and that means more than just noisy arguments and questionable stew. It's one of the few times during the year when everyone gathers in the same place at the same time, like some grand, bearded constellation of neighbors, traitors, criminals, and goats. The goats are always invited, even if no one knows why. In a world without clocks or printed calendars, these events serve as time's anchor. Everyone remembers when the last thing happened, who insulted whom, who threw up behind the mead stall, who accidentally proposed marriage to a cousin twice removed. And now that it's here again, you know where you are in the year. Historians still debate how frequently things occurred. Some say twice a year. Others think they were more seasonal or localized depending on the region. But what's clear is that they were major temporal landmarks. You didn't miss the thing, not unless you were dead, and even then, someone might drag your bones there just to settle a dispute. You arrive at the makeshift meeting field just as two men are loudly explaining why each of them technically owns the same sheep. A third man is holding the sheep, who looks thoroughly unconcerned. This is Viking democracy in action. You find your family's tent by the pile of firewood. Your sister stubbornly insists is her contribution to civil order. She's already inside, sipping something too strong for this early in the day, and organizing dried herbs with the intensity of someone hiding from social obligations. The thing isn't just for law. It's for trade, for gossip, for weddings and wagers, and the sacred act of collectively complaining about the weather, and it marks the year in a way few other things do. People say before the last thing or after thingfall when they mean months ago or next season. Time here is measured in meetings. You duck inside the tent to grab a cloak. The weather is shifting, as it always does this time of year. That's another cue. Thing time almost always coincides with the rains. It's part tradition, part curse. Outside, someone is reciting a legal case in verse because, yes, in some regions, disputes had to be presented poetically. You imagine modern courtrooms trying that. Your Honor, my neighbor's fence encroaches 6 feet past the commons. Hence, one quirky tidbit, some things reportedly began not with a speech, but with the passing of a symbolic stone or staff, called a lawsayer's stick, which the speaker would hold while reciting the rules. Drop it, and you lose your turn. Or possibly your dignity. You wander among the crowd, brushing past wool traders and cheese merchants, and one particularly enthusiastic woman trying to sell blessed onions. You catch snatches of conversation. After last thing, my cousin married a thrall. Can you believe it? Or quotes. If it rains during thing, the gods favor our crops. This mead tastes like regret and beeswax. Everywhere, people mark time through storytelling. Since the last moot, 2 things ago, back during the sheep trial, it's a collective memory, shaped by rhythm and repetition. And you start to remember too. The last thing was warmer. Someone wore a flower crown. The skald recited a saga so long your legs fell asleep. You ate dried eel that tasted like smoky rope. All of that, those feelings, tastes, images, become a temporal map in your mind. There's something oddly efficient about it. You don't need dates when you have stories. The day unfolds in predictable chaos, arguments over property, feasting, a formal duel, nobody seriously injured, just one bruised ego and a slightly dented shield. The sun sinks low, casting a golden light over the grassy clearing as people settle in for the most important part of Thing Week, remembering what time it is. Not right now. Mind you, that's not the point. The point is knowing where you stand in the spiral of the year, knowing what's behind you, and what's just around the bend, the next harvest, the next storm, the next birth, or loss, or joyful drunken mistake. As twilight arrives, you watch the fires being lit around the meeting space, and you realize you've never once asked anyone what hour it is. You haven't needed to. The thing is its own clock, its own calendar. Tomorrow, people will start to pack up, tents folded, goods traded, curses mumbled under breath. They'll say, "See you next thing," and that will mean something. It will mean soon, or not soon enough, or when the goats molt again, depending on your relationship to time and livestock. But for now, you sit by the fire with your sister, a warm cup in hand, listening to the distant voice of the law-sayer echo over the field. It's not just a law being spoken, it's time itself, unfolding in rhyme and rhythm, and you know exactly where you are. You wake with a dry mouth and the vague sense that something important is happening. There's bread baking, your nose tells you that much, and someone is definitely sweeping near your head, judging by the tiny bits of straw being flung at your face. You open one eye. Ah, yes. Feast day. You roll over slowly, dodging your cousin's elbow and the tip of a wooden spoon someone apparently fell asleep clutching. The longhouse is humming with motion already, feet shuffling, pots clanking, voices pitching toward that special tone of, "Don't touch that, it's for the guests." Feast days, in a world without calendars, are more than celebrations. They're the hours of your year. You live from one to the next, and they shape the very architecture of time in your mind. You've got the big ones. Yule, when the sun turns, and you pretend it's not still dark for 18 hours a day. Or midsummer, when someone always drinks too much and proposes marriage to the livestock. But you also have the small ones, saints' feasts if you've caught the Christian bug, or the local harvest celebration known as Barley Belly Day, for reasons you'd rather not explain. And then there are the fast days, just as important and often more annoying. Days when you're not allowed to eat meat, or dairy, or anything remotely satisfying. Your family doesn't always agree on which days those are. But when in doubt, your mother simply declares it bread day and glares at anyone who reaches for the salted lamb. Historians still argue about the extent of religious fasting in Viking society, especially as Christian influence crept in. Some scholars believe early Christian converts observed stricter fasts than their European counterparts, possibly to prove their piety. Others think the rules were interpreted very loosely. Ale doesn't count, right? It's basically grain soup. You wander over to the cook fire, where your sister is laying out flatbreads in perfect rows. She smacks your hand when you try to steal one. "Not yet," she says. The feast starts at sundown. You look outside. The sun is clearly trying to set, but it's taking its sweet time, hovering on the horizon like a nosy neighbor. You sigh. Time stretches strangely on feast days. Anticipation bends it, twists it, makes it crawl. So you busy yourself. You help turn the spit, stoke the fire, and tie sprigs of herbs above the door, for decoration or protection. Your grandmother never clarified. You fold cloaks, sweep floors, and hide the good mead in a place only you know about. All the while, you're tracking time not by clocks, but by rituals. The guest with the red braids has arrived. That means It's within an hour of sundown. The fiddler is tuning his instrument. You've got 30 minutes max. The dog has stopped barking and started sniffing everyone's legs. Feast is imminent. And finally, the sun gives up and dips below the tree line. A cheer erupts. You're already grabbing a bowl. You settle in beside your kin, squashed between your cousin and a visiting merchant who smells like fish oil and ambition. The longhouse glows with firelight, flickering across smiling faces and glistening platters. There are sausages, barley porridge, baked apples, pickled herring, and something unidentifiable that someone insists is traditional. One quirky detail: some Viking communities had a designated food teller, a person who tracked and announced the courses, making sure no one missed their turn. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it gave structure to the chaos and helped pace the evening. Tonight, that role falls to your aunt, who bellows, "Now the meat," with the confidence of a general commanding troops. As the meal progresses, time becomes almost liquid. You can feel it flowing, not in minutes or hours, but in laughter, in how often the bread is passed, in the slow settling of bodies against walls and elbows against tables. Feast days also tell you where you are in the year, not just in terms of seasons, but in terms of your story. You remember last Yule, when you sat at the far end of the table, quiet and awkward. This year, you're closer to the hearth, laughing, contributing, counted. That's how time moves here, not through numbers, but through presence and position. As the night deepens, the music begins. A skald stands and starts reciting a saga, something about a lost sword and an angry goat. You've heard it before. You'll hear it again. And that's the point. These stories are timekeepers too. You know where you are in the evening by which verse the skald is on. You know someone's about to fall asleep when he gets to the part about the haunted boat. Outside, the moon has risen, the fires still burn, and even as your body slumps with fullness and fatigue, your mind is alert, awake to the way time has unfolded across this one. Beautiful, chaotic evening. There's no clock on the wall. But you know exactly what time it is. It's the time between the third verse and the snoring, between the second helping of barley and the beginning of the dance, between feast and dream. You lean back, exhale, and smile. Another year has passed. Another feast has etched itself into your memory, and you'll remember it, not because you check the hour, but because of how it felt. The fire crackles low, embers glow like coals beneath a blacksmith's hammer, and the longhouse lies in a hush of heavy breathing and muffled snores. You lie awake, wrapped in a blanket that smells like smoke, sweat, and home. Tonight, you can't sleep. Not because you're uncomfortable, though your cousin's foot is in your ribs, but because you're thinking about the sky. You slip outside quietly, stepping into the chill. The night air bites your nose, but it's clear, crisp, alive. Above you, stars blaze in constellations so familiar they might as well be old neighbors. There's the cart, the goat, the serpent that your father swears predicts stormy weather. It's the solstice, sun return night. And though no one in your village uses those exact words, you all feel it. The longest night is here, and that means tomorrow. The sun begins to fight its way back. Solstices and equinoxes don't come with fanfare. No fireworks, no digital countdowns. But here in the north, where winter can gnaw at your bones for months on end, these celestial turning points are etched deep in your bones. You mark them with fire, food, and an anxious kind of hope. Historians still argue whether Vikings celebrated the solstice directly, or if it was later folded into Yule and other midwinter rites. What's certain is that ancient Norse life was deeply seasonal, and the sun's return mattered more than any birthday or king's name day. You pull your cloak tighter and walk to the edge of the homestead, where a bundle of branches lies ready for burning. You light one, slowly, reverently. The small torch catches, and the flames flicker orange against the snow-streaked ground. All across the village, other families do the same. One by one, little blazes spark to life, dotting the darkness like fireflies. It's not a ceremony, exactly. No one yells, "Start," or reads a sacred text. It just happens, the way it always has. This is how you mark the solstice. Not with math or precision, but with feeling, with instinct. You sense it in the way the sun barely rose today, the way the chickens didn't leave the coop, the way your breath hung longer in the air than it did last week. The darkest day of the year has passed. And that means, even if you can't feel it yet, light is returning. You remember last year's fire. It burned too quickly. Your little brother fed it dry moss and nearly singed his eyebrows off. Everyone laughed. He was called Scorchhead until summer. That's how time is remembered here, not by date, but by nickname. You feed more twigs into the flame. Watch the shadows shift. Solstice night is strange, not just because it's long, but because it feels stretched, like the air itself is pausing, waiting for permission to change, and the people change with it. The entire village becomes quieter, more contemplative. Children whisper. Old folks stare into the fire like they're trying to remember something too ancient for words. One quirky tidbit: some Viking communities would spin sun wheels, large wooden circles set on fire and rolled down hills, to encourage the sun to return. It was equal parts ritual and entertainment. Yours doesn't do that. Too many accidents with goats. But you've heard stories from traders who watched the fiery wheels light up snowy slopes like falling stars. You crouch low beside your fire, warming your hands. In the distance, you can just make out the flicker of other flames, down in the valley, across the fjord, even near the forest edge, where that reclusive widow lives. Time stretches out in firelight across the land. This, you realize, is a clock too. Each flame is a tick, a heartbeat, a promise that night won't last forever. There's no bell to tell you midnight has arrived, but the fire shifts suddenly. It collapses inward, the wood cracking, sending up a final plume of sparks that rise into the ink-black sky. You whisper something, not a prayer exactly, but not a prayer. A word of thanks, of hope, of quiet recognition that you're still here, still warm, still witnessing the slow, stubborn return of light. Your people don't have a calendar pinned on the wall, but you have this: the fires, the cold, the breath in the air, and the stories told around flames. The solstice lives in your body, your community, your sense of what time means when you stop looking at numbers and start feeling the weight of the year. You let the fire die naturally. You cover it gently with snow. Then you stand and look east. Nothing yet, but you swear the horizon looks slightly less dark. Back inside, the longhouse is still. You crawl back under your blanket and close your eyes. And somewhere, deep in the earth, or the stars, or your own chest, something shifts. tomorrow. The day will be just a little longer. You're walking along the shoreline now, boots crunching over damp pebbles, the scent of seaweed in your nose and salt clinging to your lips. The wind is stiff today, pushing in from the northwest, and every few minutes, you glance up at the clouds, not just to admire the view, but to read the time. Because when you're out at sea, time doesn't come in days or hours. It comes in winds. On land, you've got chores, meals, shadows, and grandmothers to keep your internal clock ticking. But at sea, all of that vanishes. There are no hearths, no neighbors stir and stew, no chickens clucking their opinion of your schedule. Instead, you learn to track time by the patterns of waves, the angle of wind, and the feel of damp on your fingertips. You help drag a small boat toward the waterline, your fingers numb but practiced. It's been a while since you've gone fishing, but you remember the rhythm. You know you got about 3 hours, maybe less, before the tide turns. And you only know that because of the wind. One quirky bit of Viking wisdom says you can tell the hour by how many times the sail flaps before you reach the far buoy. You've tested it. It's nonsense, but fun nonsense. More reliable are the gulls. When they start shrieking and flying low, you know the tide's shifting. When they disappear entirely, it's too late. You've stayed out past safe return time. You don't need a clock to tell you that. You need legs strong enough to row harder. Historians still debate how Vikings tracked time on long voyages, whether they used rudimentary hourglasses, or timed meals, or simply estimated distances based on experience. What is clear is that their relationship with time at sea was different, fluid, instinctual, and tied deeply to their environment. You push off, the boat creaking as it floats free. The sail unfurls above you, flapping like a restless spirit before it catches the wind's attention and snaps taut. You glance upward, squinting against the pale sun, still high in the sky, but starting to slant westward. That gives you a rough guess. Maybe mid-afternoon. Maybe. There are no clocks here, only cues. The waves slap in a steady rhythm. Your uncle, seated across from you, begins humming an old rowing song, slow and measured. The beat helps him row, but it also helps him count, not numbers, but time. If you row for the length of 3 verses, you'll probably reach the fishing spot just beyond the island, unless the current's changed, which it might have, because, again, no one here knows what time it is, but they feel it. The fishing nets are cast. You sit, waiting, your eyes on the horizon. You watch the movement of the clouds, how fast they scuttle, which direction they trail. You notice the color of the sea darkens slightly, just enough to suggest that you're inching toward evening. Time at sea moves differently. It doesn't click forward. It rolls, sometimes slowly, sometimes in great, lurching waves. You've had days where you were sure only an hour had passed, only to return to find the longhouse buzzing with supper and someone shouting that you missed an entire feast. Other times, you'd swear a full day had gone by when only a few hours slipped past. The boat rocks gently, the fish bite, and you haul in the net, your hands raw and wet. You glance back toward the shore. The rocks look smaller. The sun's arc has shifted slightly asomche. You start the count again, not in hours, but in tasks. Cast the net once more. Weight 2 fish. Row 5 stanzas home. One fringe tradition among some seafaring Viking clans involved the use of floating drift clocks, small bowls filled with oil and a floating wick. As the oil burned down, You could measure time at sea by the rate of the flame. It wasn't precise, especially not in wind, but it was a tool. One more way to make sense of a clockless world. You've never used one. You rely on wind and intuition. Your father once said, "If the wind sounds like a whisper, you've got plenty of time. If it sounds like a scream, you've stayed too long. Right now, it murmurs, but it's rising. You give your uncle the nod. He knows it too. Time to turn back. The tide's about to change, and you don't want to be caught rowing into the night with tired arms and a boat full of increasingly slippery fish, as you pull the sail around and catch the shifting wind." You glance once more at the horizon. The sun has dropped below the tree line on the distant shore. Still light, but fading. You'll be home just before full dusk, back on land. You'll hear someone say you were out about half a day. You'll nod. But the truth is, you were out for 4 gull screams, 3 fish verses, 1 tide turn, and a wind that changed its mind halfway through. That's Viking time at sea. The wind has died down now, and so have the boats. You're back on solid ground, your feet squelching slightly through damp moss as you trudge toward the village. Smoke curls lazily from a dozen longhouse chimneys, and someone's already started banging pots, an unmistakable call to stop pretending you're busy and come eat. But before you return to the rhythm of ordinary life, you pause at the edge of the green, looking up at the tallest roof in the village, the hall of the Jarl. If time at sea was marked by wind and waves, time among the powerful is marked by something else entirely. Obligation. The Jarl, or chieftain, doesn't milk goats or gut fish. He keeps time with different tools, messengers, tribute rounds, war councils. His clock is measured in arrivals and delays, in alliances struck and promises kept, or broken. You've only been summoned once, years ago, to deliver a carved box of amber beads your mother traded for a bolt of dyed cloth. You remember standing stiffly at the threshold while 2 dogs eyed your ankles, and the steward asked whether you were the one who fell in the midden pit last Yule. You were. Still, you watched carefully that day. The Jarl's hearth was always lit, sign of status, and the room buzzed with a rhythm all its own. Runners came and went. Visitors sat on benches for just long enough to be acknowledged, then were dismissed with a nod or a scowl. You realized then that the Jarl doesn't keep time by the sun or stars. He keeps time by power. Historians still debate how structured Viking leadership was, whether Jarls held fixed offices or whether influence rose and fell like the tides. Some sources suggest time was kept formally, with scheduled tribute and seasonal councils. Others say leadership was more flexible, shaped by charisma, and whoever owned the most stubborn warhorse. Either way, you've noticed something. Important people don't rush. They wait. They pace. They arrive late on purpose and leave early to remind others that their time is more valuable than yours. Case in point, the annual tribute round. Your village sends gifts twice a year, once at the start of planting season and once before winter. That schedule is never written down, but everyone knows it. It's like muscle memory. Come frost leaf moon. Your father gets anxious about the quality of the sheep cheese. Your mother triple checks the basket of wool. And the Jarl's steward arrives, always wearing the same fox fur cloak, always on the second morning after the first hard frost. You spot him now, actually, riding into the village, as punctual as ever. That's how you know. It's tribute time again. The steward doesn't need to ask the date. He simply nods, accepts the offerings with practiced hands, and makes an offhand comment about how this year's goat is less lopsided than usual. Then he rides on. No clocks, no notes. Just when it's time, it's time. One quirky detail: in some regions, time was marked with what were essentially social timers. An obligation would expire after a certain number of winters or harvests. There's an old saying, a debt unpaid 3 winters turns to rot. It's vague. It's flexible. It's Viking law. In the Jarl's world, timing is strategy. A delayed message can shift a battle. A feast thrown at just the right moment can turn a rival into an ally. Even love is scheduled strategically. Marriage is arranged to match planting seasons or to cement spring treaties. You pass the hall and continue down the hill, where your own family's timing feels less grand, but no less real. Your mother is pulling ash cakes from the hearth. Your brother is already poking around the cheese cellar, accidentally knocking around onto the floor and claiming he's testing its ripeness. Dinner, you realize, is perfectly timed. Not because of a bell, but because the cows were milked just before the sun slipped behind the hills. Because the Jarl's steward left before the soup was done. Because the dogs are already snoring. That's the thing about Viking time. It exists on multiple layers. There's daily time, when to bake, when to sow, when to pull up your boots and chase the neighbor's pigs off your turf. There's seasonal time, slaughter months, thaw weeks, the sacred silence of berry days. And then there's political time, war moons, tribute turns, the long stretch between when an insult is given and when someone finally acts on it. You've seen your father wait 6 months to confront a neighbor who borrowed a plow and never returned it. He picked his moment not by the calendar, but by when the man's in-laws were visiting, more witnesses, more shame. That's time too. Back inside the longhouse, you settle down beside the hearth. Your sister passes you a bowl of stew. Your grandmother nods approvingly. Everything around you feels aligned. No one said, "It's dinner time." No one had to. The world told you in its own way, in riders, in shadows, in the silence that settled once the fire burned low. Even the Jarl, with his scrolls and messengers, can't command time. He can only move with it. Like you, like everyone else. You take a bite. The stew is hot and slightly peppery. You glance out the door just as the last sliver of sun dips below the trees, right on schedule. You're awake before dawn again, but this time not from noise or chores or someone stepping on your face in the longhouse. No, this morning, you rise with a sense of story humming in your bones, because today, the skald arrives, and that means it's time, not just to sit and listen, but to remember. In a world without clocks or calendars, without writing for most people, memory becomes your timekeeper, and stories are the strings that hold it all together. You toss on your cloak, tuck a bit of smoked cheese into your belt, and head toward the green where the skald is said to be setting up. You know the drill. Someone brings a stool. Someone else supplies beer. And the children are herded in with suspicious ease. Nobody ever says, "It's story hour." It just happens. And when it does, you feel like you've stepped outside of time, or maybe into it. The skald begins, not with a greeting, but with a line from a poem Everyone already knows. Instantly, the crowd hushes. The children lean forward. Someone's already mouthing the words. It's a saga of a king who conquered a mountain, married a sword, and somehow lost both to a talking wolf. You've heard it before, of course, dozens of times, but each telling is a little different, a little sharper. In places, softer in others. Because Viking storytelling isn't static. It evolves. It breathes. And in doing so, it marks time. Historians still argue whether skaldic poems were meant to preserve exact historical dates or simply the essence of events. But most agree these stories are the record. This is how you remember when the bad harvest came, when the ship sank, when your uncle heroically fought off a bear, or maybe a goat. It gets fuzzy. Every family has its own canon. Yours includes the year the roof collapsed, the night the ox got loose, and when Bjorn fell in love with a tree spirit. You reference these stories as casually as someone today might mention last March or back in 2019. Hey, one quirky tidbit? Some Vikings would tie stories to specific objects: a carved bead, a belt buckle, a feather. Each carried a tale, and by passing it down, you pass the time with it. A wearable history. You still have a bone pin your grandmother insists was from the ice storm year, though no one agrees what year that was, or whether it was just a really bad spilled mead incident. The skald continues now, shifting into a verse about a woman who challenged the gods to a riddle contest. You know the ending. She wins, of course, but it still thrills you. These stories give your community a shared clock, not in seconds, but in eras. They tell you who you were, what you survived, and what you still laugh about even when your feet are frozen solid. The skald finishes a stanza and pauses for effect. The silence is rich, heavy. Everyone fills in the beat with their own memories of when they first heard this tale, or who was still alive the last time it was told. You realize something then. This is your calendar. Instead of birthdays, you remember the year of the triple wedding. Instead of years, you recall 3 winters after the raid. Instead of days of the week, you think in stories. It happened the morning after the ox escaped, or before the ice broke on the fjord. Time isn't an abstract number. It's wrapped in emotion, people, weather, place. The skald shifts tone now. A different saga, more serious. This one about a lost son, a dark voyage, a choice no one ever talks about directly. You feel your mother tense beside you. This tale always lands heavier. It reminds you all of another year, a hard one you don't name out loud, but everyone remembers in the same breathless hush. That's the secret power of stories. They mark time emotionally, not just when something happened, but how it felt. Cold winters feel colder when the saga says they stole the wolves' voices. Bad harvests sting deeper when the story ends with someone planting barley in the snow, out of sheer stubborn hope. Eventually, the skald rises, nods once, and walks away without a word. No one claps. No one needs to. You all sit with the stories for a while, letting them settle, slotting them into your mental timeline like stones in a cairn. You head back to the longhouse as the sun rises fully now, lighting the frost on the grass. You pass the loom, the drying racks, the stone where your cousin fell off the roof last summer, each one its own little timestamp. Inside, your sister is already baking bread. She hums part of the saga you just heard, completely out of key, and you smile. Tomorrow, someone will reference today by the story, not the date. They'll say, "Remember the skald's tale of the woman in the riddles?" And everyone will nod, remembering this morning, even years from now. That's how Vikings mark time, in song, in saga, in moments tied to meaning, woven like threads into the long warm blanket of memory. You're standing in the oldest corner of the graveyard now, wrapped in a cloak that does little against the damp air curling around your ankles. The sky hangs low, heavy with mist, and you can smell the moss and wet stone long before you reach the memorial slabs. The stones aren't marked with birth dates. Not most of them. No born on the 4th of such and such. No sunrise to sunset inscriptions. Instead, they say things like, died at hay cutting, or fell with the red moon, or went to sea and did not return. It's death. Here. That measures time, not life. You run your fingers across one rune-carved stone. The inscription reads simply, Steinar, gone at first frost. That tells you everything. He died just before the real cold came, when the air sharpened and you could see your breath in the longhouse, even with the fire roaring. Everyone in the village remembers it too, not because of grief alone, but because the season itself was marked by it. That was the year you had to salt the pork faster, carry water in pairs, and listen to his wife sing the same song every morning like it was a ritual to keep the sun from quitting on you. Historians still argue whether Viking graves were meant to serve as timekeeping references for the living, or if this was simply poetic habit. But one thing's clear, death days stick. In a culture where written records were scarce, and birthdays rarely mattered, the day someone left often became a more meaningful calendar mark than when they were born. You crouch beside another stone, half covered in lichen. This one bears a different kind of message, more symbolic. He went west with the last storm. You know that means he died during raiding season. The last storm usually blew in late autumn. That was the season of farewell feasts, salt-packed travel rations, and quiet prayers muttered behind bravado. These markers aren't just poetic, they're functional. When someone says, "That was the winter after hockey fell," everyone knows what they mean. It's how time is passed down, not in numbers, but in reference points, anchors. One quirky detail: in some regions, families would carve not the name of the deceased, but the role they played. You've seen markers that simply read, "the midwife," or "the one who fed the geese." The name was secondary. What mattered was the time they filled in the community, their job, their season, their space in the rhythm. You rise and walk toward a newer grave, one with fresh-cut runes and a small wreath of herbs, now browning at the edges. This one does have a name, and beside it, "Passed at Firelight Feast." You pause. That was less than a year ago. You remember the feast, too. Not because the stew was good, it was not, but because the skald sang an old tale about a man who made peace with death by outdrinking him. Everyone laughed. And then, just as the song ended, the coughing started. Quiet at first, then ragged, then gone. You hadn't thought about that moment in weeks, but the inscription brings it back, places it squarely on your internal timeline, another notch on the wheel of the year. You step back, the mist beating gently on your sleeves. Around you, the grave markers blend into the earth, some leaning, some sunken, all whispering silent reminders. This is time too. In the Viking mind, Death wasn't a full stop. It was a chapter title, something to orient yourself by. The spring after her passing. The harvest after the accident. 2 winters since the illness. Your people count backward and forward from those days, measuring time in echoes. Back in the village, someone rings the goat bell, not for the goats, but to signal it's time for the midday meal. You smile at the irony. A death yard to a lunch bell in 10 steps. You head down the hill, your boots trailing small arcs in the wet grass, and as you pass old Eric's longhouse, he calls out, "Don't forget, tomorrow is Yordis's remembering." You nod. That's how they say it here. Not her death anniversary, just her remembering. The day everyone brings fish stew, her favorite, tells slightly exaggerated stories about her, and ends the night with sore ribs from laughter. And that's how you mark the years, not with candles on a cake, but with stew, with silence, with stories told by firelight, with a stone that says, "Fell before thaw." You don't need dates when you have that. You wake to the rhythmic thunk of someone pounding herbs, the scent of sage and juniper thick in the air. The longhouse is quiet otherwise. Most of your family has already gone out to check the traps or collect firewood, but here, in the small alcove off the hearth, your mother and aunt are busy with one of the oldest forms of timekeeping you know, women's work. Not the kind of women's work people grumble about with rolled eyes and aching backs. No, this is different. This is calendar work, memory work. The kind of labor that measures the passing of seasons and cycles of life and healing. You shuffle over, still half asleep, and watch as your mother sorts dried leaves into tiny piles. Your aunt grinds them one by one with practiced grace, humming low under her breath. The hum changes slightly with each herb. Ryegrass gets a slow tune, mugwort a quicker one. You've always thought of it as music with a schedule. These aren't just spices. They're seasonal markers. Certain herbs only grow during narrow windows. Some have to be picked at night. Others are only gathered under a waxing moon, or when the first frost dusts the meadow. You learn the timing not through a book, but through repetition, through watching the women who came before you do it year after year. Historians still argue whether Viking women had formalized calendars for herbcraft and healing rituals. Some believe their knowledge was purely oral and intuitive. Others suggest that women may have kept private records, runes etched on sticks, or marks hidden in weaving patterns. Whatever the truth, you know this. They never forget. Your sister wanders in next, clutching a strip of wool soaked in dye. She lays it flat to dry. The color, deep blue with just a hint of purple. That tells you something. The dye only sets like that when boiled with a very specific root, and that root only becomes viable 2 weeks after midsummer, which yep, it's that time. You smile. You didn't need a sunstone, or the moon, or a scald saga to tell you what season it is. You just needed your sister's hands. One quirky custom? Some households track pregnancies not by counting months, but by anchoring them to events. She conceived after the goat feast. She gave birth when the lake thawed. Women's bodies are calendars here too, and not in a poetic sense. If you want to remember when your cousin's baby was born, you just ask. Was that before or after the fishing nets rotted? You sit on a stool, warming your hands by the hearth, and listen to your aunt mutter to herself about her June salts. She means the jars of salt she set out to dry herbs in 2 months ago. They're ready now. Ready because she knows how long it's been by the shape of the air, the way the floorboards creak, and the crisp snap of dried thyme in her fingers. There's no question of forgetting. These women don't just track time, they embody it. Your mother calls you over to help sort the dried roots. You recognize most of them, but one throws you off. Pale, curled like a sleeping bug. "Angelica," she says before you can ask. "Last batch. Picked it right after your cousin's wedding." You nod. Of course. The wedding with the goose incident. You'll never forget that. In this corner of the world, time gets preserved in jars, infused into salves, whispered in old recipes passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Often, with strange warnings like, "Don't stir widdershins," or "Only use the second rain of April." You help crush a few stalks, sneezing at the dust. Your mother watches you with a slight smile, then hands you a folded cloth packet. Inside are dried petals, soft and faintly sweet. "Winter tea," she says. "Don't drink it now, not until the frost comes twice." You nod again. The instruction sticks, not because she'll write it down, but because the moment matters. You'll remember where you were, how the air smelled, the exact rhythm of her voice. Even the weaving patterns tell time. Your sister's loom, tucked behind the food stores, shows a slow progression of colors. The thread changes shade just slightly every week, tracking not only her progress, but the sun's position when she dyed it. You can read the cloth like a scroll. Here was berry time. Here was mildew week. Here was when the chickens disappeared. No one speaks in dates, but everyone knows. And when your grandmother finally joins you by the fire, her joints stiff, but her gaze sharp, she brings something older still, a pouch of teeth, not human, thankfully. Boar, goat, fish, each one from a season, each one labeled, in her mind, with the story of how it was acquired. She rattles them in her palm, closes her eyes, and begins to hum. A different tune now, one with pauses, changes in tempo. You've heard it before. It's her way of reciting the years, of counting what's been lost, what's been kept. Time here isn't etched in stone or ink. It's remembered through the hands, the eyes, the breath. Women's timekeeping is quiet, precise, and deeply rooted, a rhythm set to boiling pots, dried petals, scratched runes hidden in the base of a spoon. You reach for the tea packet and tuck it into your pouch. You'll remember. You're standing near the edge of the village clearing, wrapped in your cloak, the sky heavy with cloud cover, and the trees whispering with the sound of leaves about to let go. It's that time again. The air tastes like metal, the ground is slick with drizzle, and the gooseberry bushes have finally surrendered to the season. You're not waiting for a festival or a feast this time. You're waiting for something more serious, something that measures time with silence, goose calls, and the soft thud of wooden staffs striking earth. It's thing time again, not the festival part this round, but the legal part. You make your way to the things Ted slowly. Everyone does. There's something about walking toward the law that makes your feet drag just a little, even when you're not in trouble. Especially when you're not in trouble. Vikings didn't have courtrooms or judges in long black robes. Justice happened in the open air, in a ring of stones, or on a hilltop, wherever the community could gather. Time in this world was punctuated by oaths, accusations, and the kind of public apologies that tend to stick in people's memories for years. Historians still argue whether Viking law was mostly oral, or whether early rune-based legal codes existed prior to Christian influence. What's clear is that the thing functioned not just as a court, but as a communal clock. It told you where you were in the year. It told you what season you'd entered. It reminded everyone of who owed what to whom and when. You spot the law speaker as he steps into the center, a tall man with a voice like gravel and the kind of memory that can recite 5 generations of land disputes without blinking. He carries a staff, not for walking, but for marking time. When he raises it, the crowd falls silent. When he lowers it, someone speaks. That's how this begins. You settle into your spot among the listeners. To your left, a shepherd muttering about fence rights. To your right, 2 brothers who haven't looked at each other since last year's argument over a collapsed shed. They will not resolve it today. You can feel it. The law speaker begins, not with a speech, but with a chant. It's rhythmic, familiar, like a song you learned in childhood but never wrote down. It sets the tone, calls the year into order, reminds everyone that this moment counts. The first dispute is simple, a broken contract over a pig. The second, a lost ring with suspicious timing. But the third, that one takes everyone back. It's a follow-up from 2 things ago. You remember it clearly because it was the summer with the purple lightning, and someone brought spoiled mead that made 3 elders fall asleep mid-argument. The continuity is the key. Viking law doesn't always seek swift justice. It seeks memory. Cases can last seasons, even years. And each thing becomes a marker. This started the spring after Hala's wedding, or before the lake thawed but after the cow incident. These references carry weight. They build the timeline of your world. One quirky tidbit, some oaths were sworn by shadow. A person would stand with the rising sun at their back, and their shadow would stretch forward onto the sacred ground. If they lied while their shadow touched that spot, well, let's just say no one wanted to test what happened day. A young man is called forward to swear an oath on a matter of inheritance. He places his hand on the hilt of a sword, not because it belonged to his father, but because it didn't. It belonged to the person accusing him. That's the tradition. Speak truth while touching the weapon of your opponent, just to keep things spicy. He speaks, quietly, but clearly. The words are simple, rhythmic. Everyone listens. No one interrupts. This is sacred. This is time, marked not in ticks or talks, but in truth and risk. When the law speaker nods, the boy is allowed to leave. His shadow, just barely visible under the clouded sky, stretches behind him. Someone whispers, "He was honest." Someone else mutters, "We'll see by next frost." And just like that, it's done. You stay until the final dispute fades into murmurs. Someone brings out a drum, not for dancing, but to call the end. 3 slow beats. The sound carries across the field, into the forest, across the years. It means this session of time has closed. Back in the village, people return to their chores, but already, they're marking the day in their minds. We settled the pig debt. This thing. The oaths were taken with no wind. Good sign. No one yelled this time. Not even Fritus. You pass your grandmother's hut. She's already carving a symbol into the beam above her door. A simple line with 2 notches. Her own code for the day's outcome. She's been keeping that beam for decades. It holds her memory of the years better than any chronicle. You smile, because you know exactly how you'll remember today too, not by the date, not by the hour, but by the tone of the chant, the shape of the shadows, the rhythm of truth. time keeps ticking, but here, in this world, the thing keeps time. The bell rings. Not a church bell. Not yet. This one is smaller, bronze, hand-cast, and hanging from the side of a wooden post outside a half-finished chapel. It doesn't quite fit in, and that's the point, because this is the sound of change. You're standing on the edge of the village, watching a monk in a patched brown robe pull the rope again. The bell swings. It chimes. And with that sound, something new arrives in the Viking sense of time. The hour. The Christians have come, with their strange books, soft sandals, and very particular sense of when things ought to happen. They bring liturgy, saints' days, and a calendar so crammed with obligations it makes your uncle's fishing schedule look lazy. And, most of all, they bring bells. You've heard them before, faint and unfamiliar, across the water, from the monastery at Lindisfarne, or the newer outpost down the coast. Now the bell is here, in your home, and it rings at the same times every day, rain or shine, feast or famine, even when no one is listening. You shuffle your feet and glance at your cousin. She rolls her eyes. You both know what's coming next. Prayer time. Not just a prayer, the prayer. Always at the same time, always with the same words. The monk claps once and says, "Tierce," which apparently means third hour, but you've yet to find anyone who can explain third after what. Still, people gather, slowly, awkwardly, you included. Historians agree that the spread of Christianity marked a huge shift in how Vikings experienced time. Before, it had been elastic, local, intuitive. Now, time began to standardize. It came with bells and rules. Monasteries marked the day into fixed intervals. Matins, prime, tierce, sext, none, vespers, compline. A cycle of prayers that cut the day into slices like a well-sharpened six. The monk light a candle. He starts chanting in Latin, words that roll and echo in the cool morning air. You don't understand most of it, but you do understand the rhythm. The candle burns slowly. The chant lasts exactly the length of its wax. You realize this too is a clock. The monk isn't watching the sun. He's watching the candle, timing his world in wax and ash. After the prayer, the monk reads a passage about St. Cuthbert and his fasting, which sounds suspiciously like your cousin's attempt at rationing beer. But then he pulls out a wooden plaque with etched lines and golden dots, the start of what he calls a calendar. It shows feast days, holy days, saints' days, days when you don't eat meat, days when you eat only meat. It's overwhelming. It's also oddly fascinating. One quirky detail: these early calendars often used golden numbers to align lunar cycles with saints' feast days, creating a kind of hybrid system that tried to track both the moon and Jesus' party schedule. They even had something called a perpetual calendar, which sounds like an endless to-do list. And frankly, you're glad it's not your job to memorize it. You listen as the monk explains that next week is the feast of St. Olaf, and that everyone is encouraged to confess their sins and avoid salted fish for a day. Your uncle mutters something about salted fish being a sin, and earns a sharp elbow from your aunt. Still, you mark it in your head. Fishless Friday, next week. That's how it begins. One bell, one adjustment, one new day on the mental map. And soon, it's not just the monk. Your neighbors start referencing these times. The blacksmith says, "I'll have it ready by sext." The baker starts lighting her oven during prime, like the brothers do. Your cousin swears she can feel her stomach growl exactly at vespers. You suspect it's just because she likes the bread they serve after prayers. You return to the longhouse and find your mother adjusting the stew pot. "Enough time to simmer until none," she says. You blink. The shift has started. It's subtle. No one abandons the old ways. But a layer is added. Time now has names, labels, hours. You go outside that evening and sit near the bell post, watching the shadows stretch. When the bell rings again, Compline, it's deep twilight. The monk kneels again. Fewer people come this time. Some are tired, others indifferent. But you feel something strange, comfort. There's something soothing in the regularity, the predictability. You still prefer the sun and the sheep and the subtle sagas of wind. But now, this new sound adds another rhythm, another layer of structure to your day. And, oddly, it makes you notice the time more, not less. You feel when it's coming, when it's passing. You don't just drift. You attend. Tomorrow. You know, the bell will ring again. You're not sure if you'll go, but you'll hear it, and you'll know time is changing, but it hasn't left you behind. You lie awake again, this time not from noise or hunger or cold, but from the slow, eerie realization that something has changed, not in the world, but in you. You glance toward the longhouse roof where morning light usually peeks in, but this morning, you know the hour before it even arrives, because now, you expect it, ever since the bell came, and the monk's strange Latin chant wedged itself into your daily rhythm like a splinter of incense-scented wood. Your sense of time has sharpened. It's still wrapped in smells and sounds and chores, but now there's something else. Something ticking in the back of your head, even when no one says a word. You roll out of bed and start the fire before anyone else. You know it's about time. Not because the smoke hole glows, but because it's nearly prime. You can feel it in your bones. You never thought you'd use the word prime. But here you are, you slip outside, and the world is crisp and quiet. The frost hasn't yet melted from the roof thatch. Chickens rustle in their coop. Somewhere down the road, you hear the distant clang of the bell, just as your hands are blowing warmth into the hearth, and you nod, right on time. Vikings have always been good at adapting. That's how you survived winters, famines, raids, and that one terrifying spring when everyone decided to try turnip beer. But now, the adaptation is happening on a different level, in how you think about time itself. It used to be that you felt your way through the day. Now, you can name it. You find yourself carving runes for vespers on a bit of birch bark, not because the monk told you to, but because it feels right, because something inside you wants to mark the hour, and you're not alone. Your father starts measuring his work in before sext and after none. Your aunt is now planning dye batches based on liturgical feasts, not berry color. And the children, they race to see who can get to the bell post by Compline, just to sit and watch the candle burn down with the monk. They don't even understand the prayers. They just like the rhythm. Even the livestock seem to be adjusting. Or maybe you're imagining that part. Hard to tell with goats. Historians often describe this slow layering of Christian time over pagan tradition as a palimpsest, a scroll where one story is written on top of another. You can still read the old tale beneath the new, and that's exactly what it feels like, because you haven't forgotten the old ways. You still mark the year by the sheep's first bleat and the moon's tilt at dusk. You still feel a shift in your breath when the berries come in, and when the frost nips the ground before breakfast. But now, it all overlaps. You help your mother with the washing, and without thinking, you say, "We've got 2 hours till sext." She blinks, then nods. No one comments on the new vocabulary. You all just use it. Later, you join the monk by the chapel. He's patching a leak in the roof and cursing very quietly in Latin. You offer to help, and he hands you a clay tablet covered in etched lines. "What is it?" you ask. "A computus," he says. "It calculates the date of Easter." You stare at it like it's a puzzle box. One quirky detail? Early medieval monks spent months each year just working out when Easter would be. It wasn't fixed. It had to align with the full moon after the spring equinox, which meant lots of math, astronomy, and praying for fewer clouds. These computus tables were their version of time magic. You hand the tablet back, still baffled, and return to your chores. But the image of it sticks in your mind. Etched lines, golden numbers, something about it whispering of a very different world. And yet, it's also just another way to keep track. Just like the tally bone, or the shepherd's whistle, or the skald's story. That evening, you sit near the fire with your grandmother. She's carving something into her spoon again, the same one she's used for 30 winters. You peek over her shoulder. "It's a sun cross," she says. "From before." You nod. "But I made the arms longer," she adds with a wink. "For the hours," and you laugh. Because it's true. You're all mixing the new with the old now. Even your grandmother, who once called the monk a wine-drenched clockman. You settle beside her as the fire crackles and the light dims. You still don't wear a timepiece, but you feel the hours passing anyway. You count the prayers. You watch the candles. You hear the rhythms. You're not just marking time anymore, you're naming it. You're watching your breath cloud in the chilly morning air as you stand near the edge of the stream, where someone's laid out bundles of linen to bleach in the frost. The days are short now, blink and you miss the sun, and the light has that flat, gray quality that makes everything feel paused. But even in this stillness, you're aware of the hour. You don't know how you know, but you do. The bell rings. You don't flinch anymore. It's just there, part of the world now. Not disruptive, but anchoring, like a tree that grew overnight and now everyone leans against without thinking. What's odd is, you've started looking for it. It's not just the church bells, though they ring out with near religious punctuality. It's the rhythm they've created in you. You find yourself thinking, "I'll finish this before Vespers," or "We should meet after Prime." It's a structure that's wrapped itself around your day like a vine, quiet, gradual, firm. And yet, layered over this new order are the echoes of the old ways, the ones you grew up with, the ones that still sit, quietly, behind your grandmother's eyes and your own instincts. Like now, you glance up at the sky, not for birds, but for a particular slant of light. It's a time your family calls shadow length, when the sun's just low enough to cast a shadow twice as long as you are. It means it's nearly time to feed the animals. You've never been told this by a bell or a book. You just No, everyone does. Historians point out how, even after Christianization, people across Scandinavia continued to blend solar and lunar observations into their daily routines. The bell might call you to prayer, but the shadow on the fence post still tells you when to light the hearth. You return to the longhouse. Someone's already added peat to the fire, and the room glows with the soft orange of early evening. Your cousin is measuring wool, not with a string, but with her fingers and a whispered chant she's done since childhood. One loop, two fingers, sundown, sky gray. You know the pattern. It's nonsense to outsiders, but to her, it tells her how many loops she can spin before the light's gone. You smile and join her, helping stretch the yarn across the frame. Neither of you mentions time out loud, but you both feel it, that slow, ancient pressure in the chest that says, "Finish this before the world turns dark again." Later, when you step outside again, the bell rings once more. Compline, the end of the prayer day. You're already halfway to the chapel before you even realize your feet moved. It's not devotion, exactly. It's habit. And this habit has made the days noticeable. You used to slide through the seasons, tracking them in scent and sensation. Now, each day feels like a unit, a thing with a beginning, middle, and end. Not because someone taught you, but because something inside you aligned with it. One quirky example, the monk has started carving small wooden tokens for feast days, simple discs with symbols burned into them. He passes them out to children, who now trade them like game pieces. "I've got Saint Swithin," one yells. "I'll give you 2 martyrs for your Candlemas." You never thought of time as collectible, but here we are, back at the longhouse. Your father is kneeling near the door, repairing the hinges before the first snow traps them shut. You bring him a cup of warm broth. He thanks you and says, "You're early, not quite vespers yet," and you realize you never told him the hour. He just knows, like you do. That's the shift. Everyone has begun measuring time, not just by instinct or tradition, but by name, even if those names came from foreign prayers and Latin chants. They've taken root in your soil, but that doesn't mean the old ways are gone. They're layered, folded, nested. You still call things goose moon and root week. You still whisper that someone died before frost. But now you also say, "Let's eat after none," and "I'll light the lamp at matins." The two systems aren't fighting, they're dancing. One gives you rhythm, the other gives you memory, and together they let you do something your ancestors never could. Compare. You can say, "It's later than yesterday," or "This took 3 hours instead of 2. You know what a delay is? Now. And because of that, you've become better at planning, preparing, even resting. There's a comfort in this hybrid world. A bell rings, a kettle boils, a shadow lengthens on the wall, and you, in the middle of it all, sit down beside the hearth and smile, because now you know time doesn't just happen to you. You meet it. It's the end of the year now, or at least the end of the year as you know it. There's no universal date, no great countdown, no exploding fireworks or falling apples. But in your world, the turning of the year feels unmistakable. It smells like ice and smoke. It sounds like silence, deep silence, broken only by the occasional creak of timber or the distant bark of a dog who also seems to know something has passed. You're walking the perimeter of the longhouse, wrapped in every scrap of wool you own. Your boots crunch softly through hoarfrost. The sun, such as it is, hovers just above the horizon for a few hours, casting long, sleepy shadows over the snow-crusted yard. And with each breath, you know, this is the turn. You don't call it New Year's. You don't need to. You and everyone around you can feel it in the bones of the earth. This is the quiet hinge where the old year ends, not with a bang, but with a whisper, and a new one begins its slow, reluctant climb. Inside, preparations for Yule have already begun. Pine branches hang above the door, and a boar's head sits slightly off-center on the ceremonial platter. Your uncle got distracted halfway through brining it. The mead barrels are tapped. The stories are polished. The jokes are reheated, like the oatcakes. Yule isn't about surprise. It's about return. Vikings didn't count years the way we do now. They didn't track them in rows of 12 months or line them up neatly with numerical labels. They lived through cycles, harvests, snows, storms, and returnings. Their new year came not on a specific date, but when it felt right, when the world told you it had turned. Historians still debate whether the Yule feast marked the official beginning of the Viking year, or whether that came later with more Christianized calendars. But evidence from runic inscriptions and saga references shows one thing clearly. Yule was the time of reckoning. Debts were paid, oaths were renewed. New plans were whispered over ale mugs, while frost painted the windows with invisible runes. You step back inside, brushing snow from your cloak. The longhouse is warm and packed with people, all of them talking louder than necessary, as if they're trying to chase away the dark. Your grandmother is in her chair by the hearth, sharpening her stories. She's already told the one about the blizzard wedding twice, and no one minds hearing it again. You sit beside your sister, who's threading red wool into a simple knot bracelet. For luck, she says. She gives you one too. You tie it without thinking, the wool scratchy and reassuring on your wrist. Tonight, you'll stay up late, not to watch a ball drop or count backward from 10, but to remember, to gather around the fire with your family and say, "This was the year of the broken plow," or "This was the year we almost lost the cow but didn't," or "This was the year of the midnight boat and the accidental sheep theft." One quirky tradition? Some families burn a year stick, a carved piece of driftwood marked with notches or small rune stamps, one for each notable event. The stick is tossed into the fire during Yule, symbolically clearing the ledger. You did it last year. And the flames caught quick. Too quick. Your uncle said it was a sign you'd worked too hard and remembered too little. This year, the stick will burn slower. You'll make sure of that. Someone passes you a bowl of stew. Another hands you a mug. The bell doesn't ring tonight. The monk, tucked into the chapel on the hill, has gone quiet too. Even his routines take a pause. You think he feels it too. This not quite a moment. When the year folds in on itself and then unfolds, soft and unfamiliar, the fire pops. Sparks spiral upward like tiny stars. No one speaks for a moment. Even your cousin stops tapping his spoon. And in that hush, you realize something. You've lived an entire year of timekeeping. Not by the tick of a clock, but by rhythm, memory, pattern, and pulse. You've watched the sun slide along the longhouse beams. You've read the moon like a poem. You've counted fish verses and shadow lengths, stew stirs and spinning songs, notches in bone and turns of the tide. And now you're here, at the year's edge, not watching it end, feeling it begin. The fire crackles low now, the longhouse quiet. Most have drifted to sleep, some mid-conversation, others curled like cats beneath wool blankets. You remain awake just a little longer, watching the shadows shift softly on the beams, listening to the breath of the sleeping village all around you. Outside, the snow falls gently, patting the world in silence. You can almost imagine time itself slowing to match the hush. No bells, no counting, just the long exhale of another year, closing like a door behind you. And as you lie down at last, pulling the blanket to your chin, you feel the weight of everything you've lived, not heavy, but steady, each moment, each marker, a stone in the foundation beneath you. You are built from time, shaped by the stories and the rhythms you've walked through. No need to rush now. Let the world turn without you for a while. Let the new day arrive slowly, stretching its limbs like a yawn. You've kept time the Viking way, through your senses, your songs, your hands, through shared meals and solstice fires, through days counted by fish and moons and whispered prayers. There's no need to measure more tonight. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Here, now, at rest. So close your eyes. Let the rhythm go. Let the dark cradle you. The fire will keep, and time will keep too. End of script. Sweet dreams.